Late night on an empty street, the city at night was a cold gray. The yellow streetlights reflected off the puddles on the sidewalk, reflecting a faint light. The air was chilly, a light breeze carrying the musty smell of old alleys. Police officer Ethan Carter tugged at the collar of his jacket, shoving his hands into his pockets, trying to shake off his fatigue. Tonight his shift had gone longer than expected. A robbery in the city center had just ended, but everything was under control. Ethan had long since gotten used to the rhythm of a police officer's life. Long, empty streets, sirens wailing in the dark, and unpredictable situations. But tonight, something was different. He slowed down, his eyes scanning the streets. A strange feeling crept into his heart, a vague premonition, but it sent a chill down his spine. The puppy appeared suddenly. Something touched Ethan's leg. He bent down, startled. A puppy. It was small, muddy, its eyes bright but frightened. Its white fur, tinged with gray, was now ruffled by the cold, its legs trembling. It stood there, staring at him, not barking, not running away. Ethan looked around. No one was there. A lost puppy? He knelt down, gently reaching out his hand to it. The dog backed away a little, but didn't run away. It looked straight into his eyes, then suddenly moved forward, biting lightly on his sleeve and pulling. Ethan frowned. "What do you want, little one?" he whispered. But the dog just kept pulling, its eyes bright with pleading and desperation. An unusual action. Ethan was a policeman. He had seen many stray dogs on the streets, but he had never seen a small dog act like this. A lost dog would panic, run for its owner, or bark to attract attention. But this puppy didn't do that. It didn't bark. It didn't run. It tried to pull him along. Its eyes were full of pleading. Ethan felt a strange urge in his heart. A strong premonition rose up. This dog was trying to tell him something. Decided to follow the dog, Ethan glanced at his watch. It was past 2 a.m. He could walk away, continue his shift, pretend nothing had happened. But he couldn't. There was something in the puppy's eyes, an urgency, a fear, a silent cry for help. It had no voice, but all it said was one thing: "Please follow me." Ethan sighed, pulled out his walkie-talkie, and told the station that he would be leaving the patrol route for a few minutes. Then he looked down at the dog. "Okay, kid, I'll follow you. But wherever you're taking me, you better hurry, understand?" The dog barked softly, its eyes lighting up as if it understood his words. Then it turned and started running. Night journey. Ethan followed quickly, his eyes always alert. The dog ran ahead for a while, then stopped and turned to look at him, as if to make sure he was still following. Then it continued running. The small streets gradually became darker. The street lights were sparse. There were old buildings on both sides, some windows still shaking in the wind. Ethan could clearly feel the uneasiness rising. Why did this dog lead him here? What was waiting ahead? Ethan's police instincts told him that this was more than just a lost dog. Something bigger was going on. The dog suddenly stopped in front of a small alley, whining softly. Ethan stepped forward, peering inside. A dark alley. The end of the alley led to an old house, the wooden door rotted, looking like it had been abandoned for a long time. The dog scratched hard at the door, hissing desperately. Ethan felt a strange pang in his heart. What was inside? He held his breath, listening. And then, a small, very small sound came from inside the house. A faint whine. A feeling of tension rose. Ethan immediately drew his gun, his heart pounding. The puppy was still staring at him, its eyes filled with worry and impatience. It was telling him to hurry. Ethan tightened his grip on the gun, taking a deep breath. Then he kicked the wooden door open. The door flew open. Dust flew everywhere, and what he saw inside made his heart clench. The abandoned house and the rotten wooden door burst open with a loud bang in the quiet night. Dust from the abandoned house flew up, mixing with the suffocatingly humid air. Ethan tightened his grip on the gun, the flashlight in his hand scanning the ruined scene inside. The old walls, the cracked wooden boards, the broken glass scattered on the floor. The house seemed to have been abandoned for a long time, but it didn't feel right. Someone was here. He could feel it. The puppy rushed inside, barking urgently, then ran towards the dark corner. At that moment, a faint whine rang out. Ethan shivered. It wasn't a random sound. Someone was here. The horrifying discovery slowly, Ethan approached the corner of the house, gun still raised, eyes full of vigilance. His flashlight beam fell on a small figure huddled in the darkness. A little girl. She was about 7 years old, her clothes were tattered, her knees were pulled up to her chest, her eyes were looking at Ethan in panic. Ethan stopped. The little girl was trembling, her face was dirty and pale, her eyes were red from crying too much. But what made Ethan choke the most was the way the puppy rushed over, nuzzling her, barking as if trying to comfort her. Ethan lowered the gun, his voice softened. Are you okay? The little girl looked at him, her lips moving, but she couldn't say a word. Her innocent eyes were filled with fear. Ethan realized that something had happened to this little girl, something terrible. The puppy licked her hand gently, its eyes shining with worry. It didn't abandon her. It had been there with her all this time, protecting her, even though it was just a small, weak dog. A tearful conversation. Ethan knelt down, placing the flashlight beside her, so she could see he meant no threat. What's your name? He asked softly. The little girl was silent. It's okay, I'm safe. The puppy whined softly, then nuzzled its head into her chest. She instinctively hugged it tightly, as if it was the only thing keeping her grounded. After a few minutes, she spoke so softly that Ethan almost didn't hear her. Emma. Emma. Ethan smiled softly, but his heart ached. Her voice was weak, as if she hadn't eaten in days. What are you doing here? Are you lost? Emma shook her head, tears rolling down her cheeks. The little girl clutched the dog's soft fur, her small shoulders shaking. Please, save my mom. A desperate plea. Ethan's heart felt like it was being squeezed. You said my mom? He leaned closer. Where is she? The little girl sobbed. They took my mom away. She told me to stay here, she'd come back, but she didn't come back. The word rang in Ethan's head like an alarm bell. The puppy licked Emma's face lightly, as if trying to comfort her. Ethan felt his blood run cold. This wasn't just a story about a lost child. Her mother had been kidnapped, and she had been left here alone, without food, without water. Only this dog had stayed with her, not abandoning her for even a second. This small, skinny dog had licked away her tears. It snuggled up to her to keep her warm, had accompanied her through every long night of fear. Ethan clenched his fists. Ethan's promise. He knelt down, his eyes looking straight at Emma. Emma, I promise you. His voice was firm. I will find your mother. I will not leave you alone. The little girl looked at him, her eyes filled with tears. Really? Really? Ethan placed his hand on his chest, where the police badge was. Do you see this? Emma nodded. This is a police badge. It means when I promise something, I will definitely do it. A second passed. Then Emma suddenly threw herself into Ethan's arms, sobbing. Ethan didn't say anything, just gently patted her back. In his heart there was only one thought: I will definitely bring them back together. The puppy wagged its tail, but its eyes were still worried. It understood that the job was not over yet. Investigation begins. Ethan pulled out his walkie-talkie, his voice sharp, without any hesitation. Center, I need an emergency support team. We may be facing a kidnapping. The other side replied, Understood, Ethan. Support will be there in 10 minutes. Ethan looked down at the loyal little dog. He gently stroked its head, his voice gentle. Good job, little one. You did a great job. The dog looked at him, barking softly, as if it knew that its journey was not over yet. The journey of the three of them had only just begun. Unusual signs. Ethan put down the walkie-talkie, his gaze still focused on the house. Everything here looked abandoned, but the strange thing was, it wasn't really deserted. He noticed a few suspicious signs. Some footprints were in the thick layer of dust on the floor, but they were fairly fresh. Empty food containers were scattered in the corner. Someone had eaten here not long ago. An old blanket and a few crumbs of bread were left, indicating that someone had slept here. Ethan looked down at Emma, then back at the puppy. It still kept its alert gaze, ears pricked, as if listening for something. Emma, Ethan lowered his voice. Before your mother was arrested, was there anyone else here? The girl shook her head, but the panic in her eyes did not lessen. Ethan sensed something was wrong. The search, and a gruesome discovery. He slowly swept the flashlight through the dark corners of the room. When the light hit a wall, he saw something was wrong. It seemed like a part of the wall had been moved recently. His heart began to beat faster. Ethan stepped forward, touched the wood, and pushed gently. Crack. A secret. Door opened. As soon as the light entered, a foul smell wafted out, causing Ethan to stop. It was the smell of blood. The puppy growled fiercely, its eyes glowing red in the flashlight. Ethan tightened his grip on the gun, then shone the light inside. The secret behind the wall inside was a small, dark room. There was a blood stain on the floor, already dried. A rusty pair of handcuffs still hung from an iron bar, as if someone had been imprisoned here. But what made Ethan nervous the most was a torn photo lying on the floor. He bent down to pick it up. It showed a young woman with a gentle smile, one arm holding a baby, but the baby's part was torn off. Ethan turned the photo around. There was a line scrawled in ink on the back. Stop looking for her. You'll regret it. Just then, a strange sound rang out outside the house. Someone's watching. Ethan tensed up and stood up, aiming his gun at the door. A shadow moved past the window, but when Ethan rushed forward, it disappeared into the darkness. Fuck, he gritted his teeth. Someone was here, watching them. Ethan had no doubt about it. This wasn't a normal kidnapping. There was an organization behind it. He looked down at Emma, who was clutching the dog tightly, trembling and afraid to move. The dog growled softly, as if it could sense the danger too. Ethan knew they were still out there somewhere, watching them. He had to act now. Urgent decision. Ethan turned to Emma, put his hand on her shoulder, his voice soft but firm. Listen, we can't stay here much longer. You have to come with me right now. Emma nodded, though the fear was still evident on her small face. Ethan bent down, patting the puppy's head. And you too, little one. The dog licked Ethan's hand gently, as if it understood that a new journey was about to begin. The call of destiny. Ethan pulled out his walkie-talkie, his voice firm. Center, this is Carter. I found an abandoned baby girl who may be involved in human trafficking. I need immediate assistance. Yes, Ethan. Backup is on the way. Ethan nodded, picked up Emma, and prepared to take her out. But as soon as he turned around, a loud noise came from the distance, as if something had collapsed. Both Emma and the puppy flinched. Ethan immediately pulled out his gun, squeezing the trigger. His police instincts went red. The enemy might have spotted them. The night run without hesitation. Ethan picked up Emma, then turned to the puppy. Let's go, little one. We have to get out of here. The dog barked, then immediately ran after Ethan. The three of them rushed out of the abandoned house. But as soon as he reached the door, a dark figure appeared at the end of the alley, standing silently in the darkness. Ethan stopped, his heart pounding. The person didn't move, just stood there watching them. Only his bright eyes flashed under the dim streetlights. Ethan felt his breathing quicken. Who was he? What did he have to do with this? The puppy growled fiercely, its fur standing on end, as if it sensed great danger. There was no time to hesitate. Ethan held Emma tightly, then took off running. The dangerous journey officially began. The night run. Ethan held Emma tightly in his arms, rushing through the dark alleys, each step echoing in the silence. The puppy ran close beside them, eyes shining in the darkness, mouth panting with exhaustion, but still not retreating. Footsteps echoed behind them. Someone was chasing them. Ethan tightened his grip on the gun, but did not stop. He knew that confronting them now was too dangerous. The most important goal was to get Emma to safety. Hold on tight, kid, Ethan said quickly to Emma, feeling her small body tremble in his arms. The puppy barked. Ethan understood. He sensed the danger too. Facing the hunter running to the end of the alley, Ethan suddenly stopped, turned, and raised his gun. A dark figure appeared, slowly walking out of the darkness. He was tall, wearing a black hooded cloak, his face obscured by the dim light of the street lamp. He was not in a hurry, not panicking. He was approaching calmly, as if he knew Ethan would not escape. Put her down. His voice was hoarse, cold as ice. Ethan tensed, his hand on the trigger. Who are you? He growled. The other man did not answer immediately, only tilted his head slightly, then said, Some things are none of your business, Carter. The way he said his name stunned Ethan for a brief second. He knew himself. He had been watching him. The puppy growled fiercely, its fur bristling, ready to pounce if Ethan gave the order. But Ethan kept his gun in place, his eyes sharp as knives. Tell me. He spoke slowly. What is none of my business? The man chuckled, a menacing laugh. The girl. He glanced at Emma. You don't know what you just touched. Ethan squeezed the trigger harder, worry rising in his heart. Emma was just a little girl. So why were they hunting her like this? Let her go, the man continued, his voice calm. You could have left and kept your life. Ethan smirked, placing his index finger on the trigger. There's another option, he said coldly. The man paused, his smile fading. Ethan pulled the trigger. Bang. The bullet flew straight at the man, but he was faster than Ethan thought. He spun around, dodging the bullet by a hair's breadth. Immediately, he pulled out a shiny knife, charging forward like a predator. Ethan spun around, hugging Emma tightly, dodging to the side, but the man swung the knife. Swoosh. The blade slid across Ethan's shoulder, leaving a long gash. The pain was immediate, but Ethan didn't have time to care. The puppy roared, charging like a bolt of lightning. Its sharp teeth bit straight into the man's knife-wielding hand. He screeched in pain, swinging his arm to knock the dog away. The puppy was thrown away, rolling on the ground. Buddy, Emma screamed, tears welling up. Ethan took advantage of that moment, turning around, delivering a powerful kick to the man's chest. Bam. He staggered back, gasping. Ethan didn't wait another second. He hugged Emma tightly, shouting, "Run!" The dog immediately jumped up, ignoring the wound, running after Ethan. The horrifying truth, Ethan raced through the streets until he was sure no one was chasing him. He put Emma down, then knelt down to check on the puppy. Buddy, Emma sobbed, gently stroking its head. Despite the pain, Buddy still wagged his tail, as if to reassure Emma that it was okay. Ethan looked down at Emma, his voice low. Emma, your mom. What did they take her for? Emma hesitated, tears still streaming. I don't know. She choked up. But Mom told me, if anything happened, she had something very important to hide. Ethan frowned. Something important? Emma nodded slowly, then timidly reached into her old coat pocket. She pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, handing it to Ethan. He opened it, and was shocked to see a list of names. The names weren't ordinary people. They were the names of high-ranking officials, big businessmen, and even a few police officers. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. He had guessed that Emma was no ordinary girl, but he had no idea that she was the key to an extremely dangerous conspiracy. Ethan's oath. Ethan looked at Emma, his eyes changing. He wasn't just protecting a little girl. He was protecting the truth that a dangerous organization wanted to hide at all costs. They wanted Emma to erase their traces. He clenched his fists, took a deep breath. Listen, Emma. He looked straight into her eyes. They won't stop. But I promise, I won't let them take you. Emma looked at him, her eyes filled with fear. Really? Ethan nodded firmly. Really? And you'll protect her too, right, buddy? The dog barked loudly, despite the wound. Ethan smiled. The battle had only just begun. Hiding and analyzing clues after the dangerous encounter, Ethan took Emma and Buddy to a safe place, an old boarding house on the edge of the city, where pursuers would have a hard time finding their tracks. The room was small, with only an old single bed and a wooden desk. Not luxurious, not comfortable, but safe enough. Ethan locked the door, pulled down the curtains, and turned on a small flashlight to avoid attracting attention. He opened the piece of paper that Emma had given him in the previous part. The names on the list appeared clearly in the dim light. Some were big businessmen. Others were government officials. And the most terrifying thing, there were even police officers. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. What did this mean? He turned to Emma, his voice low. Emma, do you know what your mother kept this piece of paper for? The little girl hugged Buddy tightly, hesitating for a long moment before saying, My mom, she used to work in a big office. I don't remember her name, but she said her job was to help immigrants find jobs. Ethan frowned. And what happened? Emma swallowed her, eyes flashing with fear. One day, my mom came home really late. She looked so scared. She told me to keep this piece of paper, not to lose it. The little girl choked, tears welling up in her eyes. 2 days later, they came. They took my mom away. Buddy whimpered softly, snuggling into Emma, as if he could feel her pain too. Ethan took a deep breath. Emma's mom had found out something in her company. Something extremely dangerous. And they took her to shut her up. A dangerous web. Ethan logged onto his computer, searching for information about Emma's mother's work. Within minutes, he found something that made his blood run cold. The company Emma's mother worked for turned out to be a fraud. It was owned by a giant corporation, but it was linked to an international human trafficking network. They created fake recruitment programs to lure immigrants to work with a promise of a better life. But the reality was that those victims disappeared without a trace. They were sold to other parts of the world like commodities. And the list Emma kept was the list of people who had received money from this human trafficking operation. A global scandal. Ethan clenched his fists. Dangerous enemies unveiled, he turned to Emma, his voice low. Emma, did your mother ever mention any names on this list? The girl shook her head, but then suddenly remembered something. Mom said about a man named Vincenzo. Ethan paused. Vincenzo. He was one of the most notorious human traffickers in North America. He ran his trade from behind the scenes, barely showing his face. He controlled a vast criminal network and had connections to powerful people in the government. If Emma's mother had information about him, she was touching the most taboo. And now Emma was in danger because of it. Ethan stood up, took out his gun, and reloaded the magazine. Emma looked at him, her eyes filled with fear. You, Uncle Ethan. You won't leave me behind, will you? Ethan paused, then knelt down in front of her, placing his hands on her shoulders. Never, he said firmly. I promise you, I won't let them take you away. Buddy wagged his tail slightly, as if he trusted Ethan too. But Ethan knew. This wasn't going to be easy. He had a whole criminal network behind him, and Ethan was all alone. If he wanted to keep his promise, he would need a plan. Ethan calls a friend. Ethan pulled out his phone and dialed a number. After a few seconds, a man's voice rang out. Carter? It's been a while since you called. Ethan looked at Emma for a moment, then turned away, lowering his voice. John, I need your help. John was a former FBI agent, one of the few people Ethan could trust. Help with what? I thought you were in trouble. Ethan took a deep breath, then said slowly, Vincenzo's human trafficking. There was a long silence. Tionsite. Fuck. You really want to get involved in this? Ethan clenched his fists. They took the mother of a child. He looked down at Emma. And I'm not going to let that happen again. John chuckled into the phone. Damn it, Carter. You're always like that. So you'll help. There was another pause before John said, meet me tomorrow morning. We're going to blow that organization up. Ethan smiled softly. Okay. He hung up, turning to look at Emma. We're going to start investigating. And I'm going to find your mother. Emma nodded, her eyes shining with hope. Buddy barked softly, as if he believed Ethan too. But then, a shadow appeared silently outside the motel window. They had found their trail. The night stalker outside the window of the old motel, a dark figure stood silently, his eyes glowing in the darkness like a predator. He was in no hurry. He just stood there watching. Why? Because he had found them. And what he needed now was time. Inside, Ethan sensed something was wrong. He walked to the window, squinting out. No one was there. But his experience as a cop told him that danger was very close. Ethan turned to look at Emma, who was holding Buddy tightly, her eyes still filled with worry. He clenched his fists. He couldn't wait any longer. Planning the counterattack the next morning, Ethan took Emma and Buddy to a safer location, an abandoned house in the old neighborhood, where they wouldn't be easily tracked. There, John, a former FBI agent, was waiting. John was a middle-aged man with a weathered face and small scars on his cheeks, his eyes as sharp as an eagle's. As soon as he saw Ethan, John smirked. Another dangerous case, Carter. Ethan nodded, tossing the file with the list of important names onto the table. We're dealing with Vincenzo. John raised his eyebrows, then picked up the file to look at it. A few seconds later, his expression became much more serious. Damn it, John muttered. Do you know who these names are? We're not just dealing with a trafficker, but a whole system of power behind him. Ethan clenched his fists. And that's why we can't wait any longer. John raised his head, his eyes sharp. What are you going to do? Ethan lowered his voice, determined. We will attack their lair. Finding Vincenzo's lair after hours of research, John found an extremely important piece of information. Vincenzo's organization was operating strongly in an abandoned port area located on the outskirts of the city. On the surface, that area was just an old dock. But in reality, it was a transportation center for illegal immigrants, where victims were taken before disappearing forever. We have to go there, Ethan said. John raised his eyebrows. Just the two of us? You're crazy. Ethan shook his head. No. We have another soldier. John frowned, not understanding Ethan's meaning. But at that moment, Buddy barked loudly. John's eyes widened, then he laughed. You're going to bring this dog? Ethan looked at Buddy, then nodded. Trust me, it can do more than a police squad. Buddy wagged his tail, his eyes glowing in the darkness. He was ready. Entering the lair midnight, Ethan, John, and Buddy quietly approached the abandoned docks. In the distance, they could see the flickering lights from inside the old warehouse where the smugglers were hiding. John raised his binoculars, observing. 2 guards. 1 on the watchtower. There could be more inside. Ethan nodded, thinking quickly. He turned to Buddy, pointing at the guards. Buddy, it's time. Buddy looked at Ethan, then growled softly. Immediately, he darted like a shadow into the night. Buddy in action, the first guard was smoking, unaware of the small dark figure approaching him from behind. In a split second, Buddy lunged forward, biting hard on the arm holding the gun. The guard screamed in pain, the gun falling to the ground. Before he could react, Ethan lunged forward, swinging a powerful punch at his face. Snap! He was instantly knocked down. The second guard turned around, startled, but John had already approached from behind, knocking him down with a single blow to the back of his head. In less than 30 seconds, both guards were neatly dealt with. Buddy turned around, wagging his tail proudly. Ethan chuckled, patting his head. Good job, little one. The battle erupts as soon as they entered the warehouse. The alarm sounded. Guards poured out from inside, guns in hand. Ethan hid behind a crate, gun drawn, ready to fight. Gunshots ring in the darkness. The raid has officially begun. Overwhelming firepower gunshots echoed in the night. Sparks flashed from the barrel, illuminating part of the old warehouse. The smell of gunpowder filled the air. Ethan hid behind a crate, clutching his pistol tightly in his hand. John was a few meters away, also firing back at the enemy. Buddy crouched low, his eyes focused like a real predator. There were more of them than they thought. At least 10 armed men were pouring out from the hidden corners of the warehouse. They were surrounded. Ethan gritted his teeth, shouting at John, We have to break out of the siege. We can't hold on forever. John nodded, shooting down one of the men who was charging at him. But at that moment, a man from above the scaffolding aimed at Ethan. Buddy saves Ethan. Ethan sensed the danger, but didn't have time to react. Buddy rushed in, pushing Ethan aside. Bang! The bullet whizzed past, just inches from Ethan's head. If Buddy hadn't acted in time, the bullet would have gone straight through his head. Ethan fell down, looking at Buddy in shock. The dog growled, then charged straight at the sniper on the scaffolding. The guard didn't have time to react. Buddy jumped up, biting his arm, making him lose his balance. The sniper screamed, slipping off the scaffolding. He fell to the ground, unconscious. Ethan choked, his heart pounding. Buddy had saved his life. But the battle wasn't over yet. The only way out, John saw that things weren't going well, shot down 2 more, then shouted, Carter, we need an escape plan. Ethan looked around, discovering an emergency door at the end of the warehouse. But there were 4 guards blocking the way. Buddy, Ethan shouted. The dog turned around, its eyes glowing in the darkness. Ethan pointed to the exit. Lead the way. We'll follow you. Without hesitation, Buddy rushed forward, weaving through the pile of crates, barking loudly to distract the guards. They were distracted by the barking, turning their guns on Buddy. Just waiting for that, Ethan and John immediately opened fire, taking them down in a flash. Buddy didn't hesitate, jumped up and used his teeth to pull the latch, opening the exit. Ethan and John didn't miss the opportunity, rushing through the door. In just a few seconds, they would be able to escape. But at that moment, bullet rang. Buddy sacrifices for his master bang. The bullet flew straight at Ethan. But Buddy rushed out to block Ethan. The bullet went straight into his side. Buddy screeched in pain, but still tried to run after them. Ethan was stunned, his whole body frozen. Buddy, he shouted. But there was no time to stop. John pulled Ethan out, and the three of them rushed into the dark alley. Buddy ran after them, blood staining his white fur. He didn't cry. He didn't stop. He would protect his master to the end. A promise between bullets, Ethan took Buddy to a safe area, checked his wound. The bullet missed his vitals, but Buddy lost a lot of blood. Emma sobbed when she saw Buddy injured. Buddy, don't leave me. Ethan placed his hand on Buddy's head, his voice warm but firm. Listen, little boy. You saved me. Now I'm going to save you. Buddy looked at Ethan, his eyes shining, but his breathing was weak. John took out the medical supplies, quickly giving Buddy first aid. Ethan clenched his fists, turned to John. We can't let this continue. I won't let them take anyone else. John nodded, his eyes determined. Then it's time to end this. Ethan looked down at Buddy, then back at Emma. We'll find your mom, and we won't let them hurt anyone else. Buddy struggled to lift his head, though the wound was still bleeding. He wouldn't give up. He kept fighting, because he believed in Ethan. Ethan took a deep breath, his eyes sharper than ever. He wouldn't let Buddy's sacrifice be in vain. The battle was coming to an end. Race against time, Ethan held Buddy tightly in his arms, feeling his weak heartbeat. The little dog bravely endured the pain, but blood still flowed from the wound on his hip. Emma sobbed, her small hands holding Buddy. Uncle Ethan, will Buddy be okay? She looked up at him, her eyes panicked. Ethan clenched his teeth, his eyes darkening. He wouldn't let Buddy die. He had to get him to the vet right away. John looked at his watch, then turned to Ethan. Take the girl and the dog. I'll find out where they're keeping Emma's mom. Ethan hesitated. He didn't want to leave the fight. But if he didn't save Buddy now, he wouldn't make it. Ethan clenched his fists, then nodded. Okay. I'll be back as soon as Buddy's safe. John nodded, patting Ethan's shoulder. You don't have to say it. I knew you'd come back. Ethan picked Buddy up, took Emma's hand, and ran out of the alley. He had to save this little dog, because it had died protecting him. The race to the vet, Ethan sprinted down the dark street, Emma trying to keep up. They had to find a vet, and fast. But it was past 3 a.m. Most vet clinics were closed. Ethan pulled out his phone, looking up the address of a 24/7 vet. There was one about 15 minutes away. He didn't hesitate, hailing a cab. A few minutes later, the car screeched to a halt in front of them. The driver stuck his head out, saw the bloody dog, and was surprised but didn't ask anything. Get in, he said quickly. Ethan and Emma rushed into the back seat, Buddy breathing weakly in Ethan's arms. Please, get to the vet as fast as you can. The driver nodded, stepping on the gas. The heart is still beating 15 minutes later. The hospital door swung open. Ethan rushed in, carrying Buddy in his arms. We need a doctor now. He's been shot, he yelled. A group of vets rushed out, pushing Ethan into the emergency room. A black-haired, bespectacled female vet approached Buddy, her hand gently checking his pulse. Buddy groaned softly, his eyes already tired but still half open as he looked at Ethan. The vet looked up at Ethan, her gaze serious. He's lost a lot of blood. We'll do our best. Ethan nodded, placing Buddy on the operating table. He leaned down, pressing his forehead against Buddy's, whispering, You're a fighter, little one. You can't give up. Buddy let out a soft breath, his eyes lighting up for a moment. Then the doctors wheeled him into surgery. Ethan stepped back, feeling his heart squeeze. Emma grabbed Ethan's hand, choking back tears. Is Buddy going to be okay? Ethan squeezed her hand, unsure himself. But he had to be strong. He had to believe Buddy would survive. Standing between two choices, almost an hour passed. Ethan sat outside the ER, eyes fixed on the door. John called. Carter, I found where they're keeping Emma's mom. I can't attack alone. If you want to save her, you have to come back. Ethan tensed. He looked toward the ER. Buddy was still fighting for his life. But Emma needed her mom too. He had to choose. Emma looked up at Ethan, knowing he was torn. She bit her lip, then said softly, Uncle Ethan, you go. I'll stay here with Buddy. Ethan was stunned, looking down at her. But Emma shook her head vigorously, tears still streaming down her cheeks. I did everything I could to save Buddy. Your mother needs me now too. Ethan stared at her. In that moment, he realized This girl was much stronger than he had thought. He bent down, placing both hands on Emma's shoulders, his eyes looking straight into hers. I promise. I'll be back. And Buddy, too. Emma nodded, clenching her fists. Ethan took a deep breath, then stood up, walking out of the vet hospital. The final battle was about to begin. The night of fate, Ethan walked out of the veterinary hospital, his eyes filled with determination. The final battle was about to begin. John had sent the exact coordinates of where Emma's mother was being held, a secluded mansion deep in the woods, about 30 kilometers from the city. That was Vincenzo's lair. If Ethan wanted to rescue her, he would have to storm the lair of one of the most dangerous human traffickers. He gripped the gun at his waist, taking a deep breath. Failure was impossible. No hesitation allowed. He had promised Emma. And Ethan Carter always kept his promises. Survival of Vincenzo's lair. An hour later, Ethan and John approached the mansion, hiding behind the trees. Under the faint moonlight, they saw at least 6 armed guards patrolling the area. John squinted, peering through his binoculars. She's in the basement, he said quietly. And Vincenzo? He must be in his own room. Ethan nodded, checking his weapons. We have to hurry. If we give them time to call for reinforcements, things will get really bad. John chuckled. As long as you don't do anything stupid, we'll be fine. Ethan took a deep breath, his eyes sharp. Let's go. The assault began. The fiery battle. Ethan quietly approached the nearest guard, clamping his neck from behind, knocking him out instantly. John knocked another one out with a single punch to the temple. But just as they were about to reach the mansion's doors, the alarm went off. The guards quickly realized there was an intruder. Gunshots are fire. Ethan dashed inside, hiding behind the wall. John shot 2 of them down immediately, but more kept pouring out. Fuck. We've been found. John hissed. Ethan tightened his grip on the gun, glancing toward the basement. There's no time left. John, hold them off. I'm going down to save her. John nodded, fired a few more shots, and shouted, Hurry, Carter. Ethan rushed down the stairs, rushing straight into the basement. Rescuing Emma's mother, the basement was cold, the lights flickering dimly. Ethan quickly discovered a woman tied tightly to a chair, her hands covered in bruises, her eyes filled with fear. He recognized her immediately. It was Emma's mother. She couldn't speak when she saw a stranger appear. Ethan rushed over, cut the rope. His voice was firm. I'm the police. Emma is safe. I'm here to get you. Out of here. The woman's eyes widened, then burst into tears. Emma, she's still alive? Ethan nodded. But if we don't leave now, we won't be able to escape. She nodded vigorously, though her body was still weak. Ethan helped her up, but as soon as they turned around, footsteps echoed from the stairs. A low voice rang out. Do you really think you can get her out of here, Carter? Ethan froze. He was here. Confronting Vincenzo, Vincenzo walked slowly down the stairs, his eyes filled with arrogance. He was wearing an expensive suit, but his cold face showed that he was no ordinary businessman. This was a real predator. Ethan pointed the gun straight at him. Take one more step and I'll shoot. But Vincenzo just laughed. Do you really think I'm afraid of guns? At that moment, his 2 underlings appeared from behind, pointing their guns at Ethan. Ethan gritted his teeth, knowing that the situation had become extremely dangerous. But Vincenzo did not rush to order him to be killed. He stepped closer, his voice soft but full of menace. Do you know why I let you live until now, Carter? Ethan did not say anything, his eyes still full of vigilance. Vincenzo smiled faintly, then looked down at the woman. Because I want her daughter. Ethan tightened his grip on the gun. He had been aiming at Emma from the beginning. This could not be allowed to happen. He did not hesitate anymore. Boom. Ethan pulled the trigger. The bullet went straight into Vincenzo's knee. He roared in pain, immediately falling to his knees. John appeared at the right time, shooting down the 2 remaining underlings. Ethan did not wait another second, dragging Emma's mother and running straight outside. Family reunion. After a breathless chase, Ethan brought Emma to safety. The next morning, at the vet, Emma sat by Buddy's bed, holding his little paw. She hadn't slept all night, just waiting for the moment Buddy opened his eyes. Ethan walked in, followed by her mother. Emma turned around startled, and as soon as she realized it was her mother, she screamed, throwing herself into her mother's arms. The two hugged each other tightly, tears streaming down their faces. Ethan smiled softly, stepping back to give them some space. But then Buddy let out a small whimper. Emma turned back immediately. The little dog lifted, his head weakly, his eyes darting around the room, then stopping on Ethan. Ethan stepped closer, patting Buddy's head gently. "You did great, little one," he whispered. Buddy wagged his tail slightly, as if he had been waiting for this moment. The family was finally reunited. A new day begins. The gentle sunlight shone through the window of the veterinary hospital, bringing a gentle warmth after a long, stormy night. Buddy was lying on the bed. The wound on his hip had been carefully bandaged. Although still weak, his eyes had brightened again. Emma sat beside him, not leaving for a moment, gently stroking Buddy's soft fur. Ethan stood near the window, holding a cup of hot coffee, looking out at the city that was gradually waking up. John stood beside him, arms crossed, eyes distant. "Is Vincenzo's story over yet?" Ethan asked. John smiled faintly, shaking his head. "He's still alive, but this incident was enough to drag his entire network down to hell." Ethan nodded slightly. "He deserves to pay for everything he's done." John sighed, then looked at Buddy lying on the bed. "You know, Carter, I've never seen a dog like him." Ethan smiled. "Buddy's not just a dog. He's a hero." A new promise. Emma looked up at Ethan, her eyes sparkling. "Uncle Ethan, are you leaving?" Ethan paused, looking at her. Emma's question wasn't an ordinary one. She'd lost her father long ago, almost lost her mother now, and Buddy was her best friend. Right now, Ethan was the only person she trusted besides her mother. He'd never thought about it before. But Ethan walked over to Emma, kneeling down at eye level. "I'm not going anywhere," he said slowly. Emma pursed her lips, then threw herself into his arms. Ethan reached out to stroke her hair, feeling the warmth of a family he'd never had before. Buddy whined softly, trying to move his body to wag his tail. Emma and Ethan both chuckled at his efforts. A new family. 3 days later, Buddy was discharged from the hospital, much better. Emma beamed as Buddy stood up, wagging his tail happily. Ethan stood there, hands in his pockets, a small smile on his face. He had brought Emma's mother to safety, helped her gain FBI protection, and brought Vincenzo's case to light. Everything was fine now. But Ethan didn't want to leave. He had lived a dangerous life, living in the shadows of cases. For the first time, he felt like he had a place to belong, a family. Buddy's new life. A month later, Buddy was completely healed. He ran around the front lawn, happier than ever. Emma ran after him, smiling as bright as the sun. Ethan sat on the steps, sipping his coffee, watching his two teammates. John walked over and patted him on the shoulder. "It's rare to see you like this, Carter." Ethan chuckled. "Maybe it's time I stopped running." John looked at Buddy, then back at Ethan. "If you're going to stay, have you thought about training Buddy to be a police dog?" Ethan glanced at Buddy, then shrugged. "He's been a hero for a long time." Buddy barked loudly, as if agreeing with Ethan. Emma ran over, hugged Buddy tightly, then turned to Ethan. "Buddy will always be with us, right?" Ethan chuckled, nodding. "Yes. And you too." A new journey begins. The sun was setting behind the trees, the sky covered in orange and yellow. Ethan, Emma, and Buddy sat together on the grass, watching the sunset. Emma rested her head on her mother's shoulder, and Buddy rested his head on Ethan's leg. Ethan felt more at peace than ever. He was no longer a lone cop. He had found a family. And Buddy, their loyal puppy, had become their hero. Though their journey had changed, one thing remained the same. Buddy's loyalty would never be broken.